90% of our problems are caused by fear, President Hoover said in 1931. The paraphrasing of this sentence 10 years later will be attributed to his successor FDR. On December 3rd, 1929, in his first State of the Union, he proposed his vision for American economy. He proposed tax cuts, increases in public works, and reforms of the financial policies. His rhetoric on fear came from a belief that the government alone cannot pull the country out of economic crisis, but it should play an active role to restore faith that investments would reap profits, and everything the government did to frighten businesses would prolong hard times. As a student of history, he already lived through multiple economic crises, the one in 1921-22 being the last one. He made a prognosis how long this new crisis could last. It was also the first one where the government took a more meaningful role in resolving the crisis. His view on economy was that legislations cannot resolve economic crisis, but only the active participators, producers and consumers themselves could resolve it. At first, he decided to turn to construction as way out of the crisis. He also was not a fan of big government, believing that local and state government will be more effective in dealing with this crisis. 29 governors pledged to increase their construction budget by $1.3 billion in 1930. Companies in charge of USA infrastructure pledged to spend additional billions of dollars. The federal government also helped coordinate supply and demand for low-skilled workers on local levels, creating hundreds of jobs, such as cleaning parks, mowing grass, building playgrounds, golf courses, etc. When it came to taxes and government spending, the mainstream opinion was that raising taxes would take the money from consumers and investors, while borrowing would drive up the interest rates and require tax increases in the future. The federal government preferred loans to grants. The difference between Hoover and FDR's budget deficit: Hoover was only comfortable with modest budget deficit, while FDR was okay with massive deficit spending. But when it's all said and done, the unemployment rate in 1939, after 6 years of FDR, was 17.2%, and in 1931 it was 15.9%. Hoover also explored plans to guarantee the employment of workers with companies that employ them, a sort of a guaranteed employment insurance. But it was all left on a voluntary basis, as the government had no legal ground to force employers to such thing. On 16th of December 1929, Congress passed a $160 million tax cut. It slashed taxes by 66% on small incomes, 4% on large incomes, and 8% on corporate incomes. In the late 1930s, Congress granted hundreds of millions of dollars for federal public works. On February 5, 1932, Hoover launched a voluntary program to promote job creation. In a few months of its existence, it placed over 600,000 individuals in jobs. Another unusual problem the government faced was hoarding of dollars and gold by the Americans. Hoover believed that each dollar withdrawn from banks limits loan potential of a bank by $5 to $10. Hoarding included by some estimates up to $1.5 billion. Hoover asked still popular ex-president Calvin Coolidge to write an article warning of the harmful effects of hoarding, which was published in New York Evening Post on February 29, 1932. Next month, Hoover delivered a national radio address from the White House deploring hoarding. The government issued the so-called baby bonds to be sold by volunteers door to door. There were new securities issued to lure money out of hoarding. They could be purchased in quantities as small as $50, were redeemable in 60 days, and paid 2% interest. Another tactic used by Hoover was initiating voluntary effort from the private sector to raise funds for the needy, including film industry. Between November 18 and 25, 600 theaters donated the ticket sales to charity, raising some $500,000. On November 7, 1931, the First Lady, Lou Hoover, delivered the first nationwide radio address by a First Lady. She suggested practical tasks to her audience of members of the youth organizations to help alleviate the mental and physical effects of the depression on their parents. American Bakers Association pledged to give unsold bread at the end of each day to the Red Cross to be distributed to the hungry. Federal government in 1931 spent a record $780 million on construction and public projects. It is estimated that in 4 years of his presidency, the government spent $2.3 billion to create jobs. In addition, state and local governments spending another $1.5 billion on public works. With his re-election closing in and crisis still going strong, Hoover decided to take it up a notch. In January 1932, a new government agency, Reconstruction Finance Corporation, was established. It was in charge of bailing out American banks and businesses, but soon it got expanded to financing states and public works projects. He increased farm subsidies, established Federal Home Loan Bank to support mortgages. On June 6, the Revenue Act was passed. It doubled the estate tax, increased corporate tax rates, and increased the top income tax rate from 25% to 63%. On November the 8th, 1932, he will lose to Franklin Delano Roosevelt by quite a large margin. Roosevelt will enter history as the New Deal president, which will be characterized with increases in federal government expenditure. However, during the campaign, he argued for a immediate and drastic reduction of governmental expenditure by at least 25%.